Story: The Forgotten Hour. It was a chilly autumn evening, and the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of twilight. As an 11-year-old girl, I had never been left home alone at night before. My parents were always careful, but this time, they had forgotten me. It had been a typical Saturday, filled with family activities and laughter. However, as evening approached, my parents received an urgent call from a relative who needed their help. In the rush to leave, they somehow forgot that I was at home, playing with my toys in the living room. The moment they left, I realized something was wrong. I heard the car engine roar to life, the tires crunching over the gravel driveway, and then the silence, an eerie silence that settled over the house like a thick blanket. The truth dawned on me. I had been left behind. Panic and fear welled up inside me. I tried to call them, but my trembling hands could hardly hold the phone. My parents' phone rang, and I knew they were too far away to answer. With a quivering voice, I left a voicemail, pleading for them to return. As the minutes turned into hours, I watched the clock with a heavy heart. Night had fallen, and the house, once filled with warmth and light, had transformed into a daunting labyrinth of shadows. Every creak and whisper seemed to echo with foreboding. I had no choice but to fend for myself. My heart raced as I remembered my parents' instructions for emergency situations. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checked the stove and oven, and ensured that the phone was within arm's reach. The house felt different in the dark. The cozy familiarity of my home had been replaced by an unsettling sense of solitude. I wandered through the rooms with a flashlight in hand, the beam of light revealing the comforting and the eerie. Family photographs on the wall appeared to scrutinize me with judgmental eyes, while the antique furniture took on ghostly shapes in the darkness. The isolation was the most challenging part. The quietness of the house was oppressive, and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway became a relentless reminder of the passage of time. Each tick and tock echoed through the house, a haunting rhythm that felt like the march of the unknown. I tried to distract myself with books and games, but the stories I read took on a sinister quality, and the games felt eerily one-sided. Every sound outside the window, from the rustling of leaves to the distant hoot of an owl, seemed to conspire against me. In my anxious state, I began to hear things, whispers in the dark, faint footsteps, and even the occasional murmur that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I knew that my imagination was playing tricks on me, but the fear had taken root. Time moved slowly, and I continued to wait for my parents' return, though each minute felt like an eternity. I checked my phone repeatedly, but there was no response to my voicemail. The battery was slowly dying, and I was left with only the flashlight for comfort. My surroundings became increasingly surreal. The living room, where I had spent countless cozy evenings with my family, was now a vast expanse of shadows and echoes. I could hardly recognize the familiar furniture and pictures on the wall, and the dim light cast long, menacing shapes that danced on the walls. Then, I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible giggle that seemed to come from the heart of the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It couldn't be real, I thought. It was just my imagination, fueled by fear and isolation. But the giggles continued, growing louder and more distinct. They were unmistakably the laughter of a child. Trembling, I followed the sound down the hallway, my flashlight revealing a door that had always been locked, a door to a room I had never been allowed to enter. As I turned the doorknob, a gust of cold air rushed out, sending a chill down my spine. The room inside was small and filled with antique toys and dolls, their glassy eyes seeming to watch my every move. In the center of the room, a child-sized rocking chair swayed gently, its movement defying explanation. The giggles were coming from the rocking chair, but there was no one there. The room felt charged with an otherworldly energy, and I knew that I had stumbled upon something I was not meant to see. As I backed out of the room, I noticed a photo on the wall, a faded photograph of a child who looked just like me at the age of 7. My heart sank as I realized that this was the child who had once lived in the house, a child who had been forgotten, just as I had been. The room felt haunted by the memories of a past I had never known, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The giggles continued, and I heard whispers in the dark, a child's voice calling my name. I had entered a realm of the unknown, and it was a place that held the forgotten, the lost, and the unseen. Story: The Haunting at Home. It was a chilly evening, and the sky had been painted with shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. My husband, Robert, was set to leave on a week-long business trip, leaving me home alone in our cozy suburban house. He had given me the usual advice, like keeping the doors locked and being cautious while he was away. Little did I know that his precautions would soon prove necessary. The first few days went by without incident. I busied myself with work, house chores, and the comforting routine of daily life. As nightfall arrived on the 4th day, I settled in to watch TV, trying to fill the void left by Robert's absence. Around 10 p.m., as I was engrossed in a thriller, the power flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I sighed, annoyed by the interruption, and reached for my phone to call the power company. But my phone displayed a message: no signal. I frowned, realizing that I had no way to contact anyone. The Otagie had left the house eerily silent, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. I tried to find a flashlight but couldn't locate one in the pitch-black darkness. As the minutes ticked by, unease settled over me. In the dark, I fumbled my way to the window. When I peered outside, I was greeted by a sight that sent shivers down my spine. The usually tranquil suburban street was shrouded in an eerie fog, obscuring the houses and trees. The pale light of the moon seemed distant, as if it were struggling to penetrate the oppressive mist. I blinked in disbelief. I had never seen anything like it. My first thought was to call a neighbor, but the lack of phone signal left me isolated. I was alone in the dark, with no one to turn to. Determined to make the best of the situation, I lit some candles and tried to read a book, but the sense of isolation was overwhelming. I found myself looking out the window more often, as if searching for an explanation for the bizarre fog that had descended upon the town. Hours passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The fog outside had not lifted, and an eerie stillness had fallen over the neighborhood. It was as if the world had been put on pause, and I was the sole inhabitant of a ghostly landscape. The night grew colder, and I wrapped myself in a blanket, hoping to ward off the growing unease. It was around midnight when I heard it, a soft, mournful cry that seemed to seep in from outside. I rushed to the window and looked out, but there was nothing to be seen in the thick fog. The cry repeated, growing louder and more desperate, and it was clear that it was not the sound of a human. It was an eerie, otherworldly wail that sent chills down my spine. My instincts urged me to lock all the doors and windows. The isolation of the house, surrounded by the fog and the eerie cries, was becoming unbearably. The television had stopped working, and I was left in darkness with only the sound of the unsettling cries. I ventured to the front door, determined to make a run for it, to find help or answers. But as I turned the door knob, an unnatural force seemed to hold it shut. It would not budge, as if something on the other side was preventing me from leaving. Panic began to set in, and I was gripped by a sense of impending doom. The cries outside grew more intense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were getting closer to the house. I ran to the back door, but it too refused to open. As I stood in the hallway trapped in my own home, a shadowy figure appeared at the window. It was a faceless, dark silhouette, its presence sending terror coursing through my veins. I stumbled back, unable to look away, as the figure slowly raised a hand and tapped on the glass. The tapping grew more insistent, and the figure seemed to beckon me. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to react. The figure's eerie tapping echoed through the house, and I could feel its presence drawing nearer. Then, the figure's mouth opened, revealing a dark void within. It spoke, its voice a haunting whisper that seemed to emanate from all directions. "Join us," it urged. Desperation overcame me, and I rushed to the nearest window. I flung it open, ready to face the horrors outside. But what I saw sent me reeling. The fog had seeped into the house, swirling around me, and the cries had grown deafening. The shadowy figures were now inside the house, their featureless faces staring at me with an unsettling intensity. I could see no eyes, no mouths, just an abyss of darkness. They reached out, their cold, intangible hands caressing my skin. As the figures closed in, I knew that there was no escape. They were not of this world, and my attempts to resist were futile. The fog had become a suffocating shroud, and the cries were now a symphony of despair that echoed in my ears. In the end, I was consumed by the haunting fog, drawn into the spectral realm of the figures. Story: The Vanishing Visitor. It was a Friday night like any other for my friend John and me. We were two high school buddies with a knack for turning boring nights into memorable adventures. This particular evening, our parents were out of town, leaving us with the house to ourselves. We were ready for an epic movie marathon and all the junk food we could get our hands on. The night was draped in darkness as we settled into the cozy living room, the dim glow of the TV illuminating our surroundings. The house was silent, and the distant hum of the neighborhood could barely be heard over the movie's soundtrack. As we lost ourselves in the cinematic world, little did we know that our reality was about to take a sinister turn. It started with a faint, almost timid knocking at the front door. We glanced at each other, momentarily puzzled. Our parents had mentioned no visitors, and we hadn't invited anyone over. The knocking grew slightly louder, now distinct and deliberate, echoing through the silent house. I paused the movie and stood up, heading for the door. John followed, his curiosity piqued. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see a friend playing a prank or a neighbor needing assistance. To our surprise, there was no one there. The porch was empty, shrouded in the darkness of the night. No shadows, no figures, just the stillness of our quiet suburban street. I opened the door, half expecting to see someone hiding, giggling at their successful trick. But there was no one. I stepped onto the porch, searching the yard and the street beyond, even though our home was situated far from the road. The night was quiet, with no signs of any visitors, pranksters, or even wandering animals. Puzzled, I returned inside, relaying my findings to John. He chuckled, dismissing it as a mere oddity. Maybe it was just the wind, he suggested. We resumed our movie marathon, albeit a bit shaken. The unsettling feeling of the unexplained knocking lingered in the background, like a subtle whisper in our ears. As the night wore on, the incident was soon forgotten, buried beneath the excitement of the movies and our teenage camaraderie. We laughed, gorged on snacks, and made plans for the weekend. But then, it happened again. The knocking returned, this time more insistent, as if the visitor were growing impatient. I glanced at John, who shared my uneasy look. We knew that we couldn't ignore it this time. With cautious steps, we approached the front door, our hearts pounding. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly unlocked the door, prepared to confront whoever was on the other side. As the door swung open, our eyes widened in disbelief. There, on the porch, stood a child, no older than 8 or 9, dressed in ragged clothes, their eyes vacant and lifeless. They stared up at us with a haunting, unnerving intensity. I was lost for words, trying to make sense of the situation. "Hey there," I finally managed to say. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The child didn't respond. They simply stood there, their gaze never wavering, as if they were looking into our souls. My unease turned to worry. "Where are your parents? Are you okay?" I asked, taking a step closer. John was silent, his eyes fixed on the eerie visitor. The child's lips parted and they whispered, "Let me in." My heart raced as I exchanged a glance with John. "I'm sorry, but we can't let you in," I said cautiously. "Where are your parents? We can call them or the police to help you." The child's whispering grew more urgent, almost desperate. "Let me in. You have to let me in." But something about the request sent shivers down my spine. The child's demeanor was far from ordinary, and the words they spoke felt like a plea, as if they were trying to escape something. Without warning, the child's features twisted, contorting into a grotesque, nightmarish visage. Their eyes turned jet black, and a sinister grin crept across their face. It was a smile that promised nothing but malevolence. In sheer terror, I slammed the door shut, locking it as quickly as I could. John and I staggered back, our faces drained of color. The knocking resumed, now louder and more frenzied, as if the child had transformed into something monstrous. We rushed to the windows to peer outside, but the sight that met our eyes was beyond comprehension. The child was no longer alone. A horde of figures, each as unsettling as the first, had appeared on the porch, their lifeless eyes fixed on us. They chanted in eerie unison, "Let us in." The cacophony of their voices grew deafening, and their chilling chants sent shivers down our spines. We knew that we had to do something, and fast. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911, but the moment I touched the screen, the room plunged into darkness. The power had gone out. In the pitch black, we were left with nothing but our racing hearts and the relentless knocking that echoed through the house.